Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. Stephen Bartlett once said, "If you learn to read books, you can be smart. If you learn to read yourself, you can be anything." And that is exactly what we are talking about today, the value of knowing yourself, your patterns, and your unconsciousness. Today, we are joined by Emma Demar, also known as That Trendy Therapist on Instagram. After overcoming her own battles with food when she was 16 years old, she is now specializing in eating disorders as well as OCD and other related mental health disorders. She is the co-owner of Intripsych Woman, a private practice in Manhattan. She's also the host of That Trendy Therapist Podcast and is coming out with her debut book, The Truth Teller, in early 2023. So many women are sleepwalking through their lives, living in unconsciousness, falling victim to their own limiting beliefs, unhealthy patterns, self-sabotage, and it's time to let it all go. During today's episode, we talked about one of the biggest causes of suffering, why eating disorders are not logical and what they really are, what actionable steps you can take to snap out of your sleepwalking state and become more intentional in your life, the different ways in which people think, and the value of personality tests. We are also going to talk about why knowing yourself and your thought patterns will allow you to accomplish anything in your life. And we finish off by talking about 3 questions to journal on to begin to know yourself and reconnect to who you are. I am so excited to bring this conversation to you. So let's get into today's episode with Emma Demar.
Thanks for having me. I really excited to get into it with you today.
Of course. And then, I love your Instagram page. I think that you are always sharing so much wisdom and helping so many women out there. And so I am really excited to talk to you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into the field of therapy, of psychology, and how you started That Trendy Therapist and where you are at today?
Cool. Yeah. So, I was saying to you before, I always loved psychology. I find myself in my free time watching documentaries about mental health and addiction just for fun. So I kind of already knew that I loved that, but I actually first track was I was acting and doing the performing arts thing. And then I went to school for creative writing. So this was not like the first idea. I never grew up and said I wanted to be a therapist. But after college, I tried a few different kind of corporate jobs, and my heart was not in that. And I knew that I wanted to do something that I was truly passionate about. And I had an eating disorder in high school. And it was through my recovery and my individual therapy was pretty instrumental to my recovery. And I wanted to kind of give that back to other people going through their own struggles. And so I wanted to be a therapist specializing in eating disorders mainly. And so I went back to school and I got my master's in social work. And right after that I was a fellow at a private practice that I still work at now. Now I'm the co-owner of that practice and specialize in eating disorders and anxiety and related mental health problems. All the while I've been building up That Trendy Therapist, which is my Instagram, my trademark brand, which is now like the umbrella for the book and all of the podcasts and everything. I always wanted to find my niche within therapy, which is kind of, whatever I do, I like to not just do the same thing that everyone else is doing. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to bring something new to the table. And during the pandemic, I decided to kind of make my therapy account these deep-seated truths and kind of start talking about the things that people maybe were afraid to say or that felt and they didn't know how to express it. And I found that was really resonating with people, especially during the pandemic, people wanting to feel seen and heard. And so that's kind of how That Trendy Therapist was born.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Especially, I've had my own issues with disordered eating, and even now there are some days where I struggle with anxiety. I'm very much like a perfectionist, and I want things. I'm always striving to be better, and there's some days where I find myself just being very hard on myself. And it's funny. I think that social media can be can be detrimental to a lot of people's social mental health, depending on how they use it. But I've really made sure that I curated it in a way that I follow accounts that I'm always learning and they always make me feel good. And on those days where I feel like I'm being really hard on myself, I actually know the couple of accounts to go to that talk about things that I know that I'm feeling, and just to be validated, like, okay, this is totally normal. Someone else is feeling this way. And I find that using that and just hearing it from other people has been so instrumental to me, because it's so easy to feel alone, especially in the work that we do when it comes to eating disorders and disordered eating. We feel broken, and the women that I work with, they feel like they're the only ones going through this because no one is talking about this stuff. If anything, we make these disordered eating behaviors seem normal and natural. And so when we have all these obsessive thoughts about our bodies and about food, it just kind of feels like, well, there's something wrong with me.
Totally. Yeah. And I agree. I think social media can be so isolating. And then on the flip side, it can also really bring people together, which is what, some of these accounts and what I've been trying to do on my account is to really actually bring people together in the collective consciousness and make them feel understood in a space where a lot of times you feel the opposite. You feel just lost in the mix. You feel like you're part of the comparison game. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a double-edged sword, social media, for sure.
Absolutely. So you struggled with your own eating disorder. Did you actually reach out to get some support and some help to heal from that?
Yes. So I originally, when it started to happen, I almost scared myself because I saw the behaviors. I did not know really what an eating disorder was. Never thought I would be the type of person that would have one from my limited knowledge of it. And so I had gone to my parents actually pretty early on. And I said, I don't know what's happening. I just know that I've never been concerned before about my weight and this and that. And I'm weighing myself multiple times a day, and started to talk about some of those behaviors. And that was kind of the alarm bell. And then few months later, I had a scheduled regular pediatric doctor's appointment. And that's when I was formally diagnosed. And then from there went to treatment.
Wow. I mean, how old were you at the time?
So I was 16.
That is very impressive that you were able to look at your own behaviors. And this is something that we're going to dive into, but just being able to stop and assess. And I think that's what a lot of people don't do, is evaluate and learn about themselves and ask themselves, okay, is what I'm doing right now, the way that I'm living, does it feel good? Does it feel right? And to mm-hmm. be able to do that at 16 years old. I mean, I probably only got to that point when I was 22, 23. That's really impressive. And do you feel that way too?
Yeah, looking back, I mean, at the time it was just fear, and it was, I think I've always been very introspective and self-aware. So I think that definitely helped facilitate, when something was off, I kind of already knew. Mm-hmm. And I think with eating disorders, which, I'm sure we can get more into, but a lot of times you don't want to take that step because you don't want to get out of it. But I think for me, I didn't really know that it was an eating disorder, and I didn't want to stay in it because I didn't like the way that it felt. Yeah. It's funny that you said that, because my mom, she'll sometimes say it's so weird, not weird, but it's so unique that you actually kind of told on yourself.
Yeah.
I literally came into their room and I sat in their bed and I was like, something's wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, oftentimes it doesn't happen that way.
Yeah. And I definitely know, as someone who, I get DMs and emails from women every single day who reach out to me, and I've honestly felt a lot of frustration in the past, and I've grown to have so much more compassion because we've done the work when it comes to bringing self-awareness and introspection. I journal every single day and I meditate, and I'm always pausing and trying to reflect on my own life. But there's so many times where I talk to women and they tell me how much they're suffering and how much they've been hurting, and all of these challenges that they're going through with food and their bodies. And one thing that has pained me in the past is oftentimes I feel like when it comes to actually taking the steps to make mm-hmm. a change, the steps, which could be going to therapy or getting coaching or investing in a program or literally just doing something that's going to end the suffering, people don't approach this with a sense of urgency. People are kind of just sleepwalking through life, and they're very okay with living, like surviving
Yes.
at best, and living unconsciously. And I know that this is something that you really talk about, is people who are living in unconsciousness.
Yeah.
So what does it mean to you to live life unconsciously?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that what it means to me is not kind of embodying your full self and being detached from reality in whatever sense that might be. So, yeah, sleepwalking is just existing. It's not really living with intent and purpose. Like, I think people, a lot of times I find, yeah, they just are very laissez-faire when it comes to their life and careless about their choices and where they put their time and their energy. And, I find that equal parts frustrating and sad and tragic, because I don't think that people understand the importance of and how amazing and enriching it feels to just be yourself and to like be an aligned individual. Right. So I try to talk about that a lot on my platform, because I don't think people are aware of it. And it used to be something that and it still does really bother me to see. But I think over time, I've tried to grow an understanding of where it comes from, because I think that's the only way that I can remain sane in a world of people that are so detached from themselves. Yeah. But it's hard. It's hard to see people selling themselves short and not taking their lives seriously.
Absolutely. And so do you think that people, I'm very curious, I think I have my own opinion on this, but do you think that people choose unconsciousness, or is it a case of you don't know what you don't know?
I think that it depends. I think that not in a conscious, I don't think people that are unconscious, I don't think they can make a conscious choice to be like, I'm turning off. I think that it's a lot of the time a result from trauma at an early age, or some situation that makes somebody want to pull back and pull back from themselves, their feelings, from other people. And I don't think that they are aware of it. They don't know another way. So they don't realize they're sleepwalking. Otherwise, I think that, they might try and do things differently. Mm-hmm. But yeah, if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I ask that because I think that, like I said, people don't know that they're living unconsciously. And I think that a lot of people just don't pause and ask themselves and ask themselves some really important questions. I know whenever someone reaches out to me and we get on a call to talk about working with me or my program, my entire goal is to understand where they're at. And so I've gotten really good at asking the right questions. And what they always say at the end of the calls is, I've never thought about things this way. Mm-hmm. And I've never, when it comes to when you're constantly dieting, you just kind of get lost in the motion and you just do the same thing over and over again. And you almost get conditioned to living a life where you're not particularly happy. Mm-hmm. You're not particularly fulfilled. And we're chasing this shiny object, which is weight loss. And we think that this is the thing that's going to bring us happiness. And we never actually realize, well, all of these things that I'm doing in pursuit of happiness is making me unhappy. So how am I ever going to wake up one morning and have this magic number on the scale that's going to bring me these things that I think they're going to bring me?
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, eating disorders are not logical, right? Like any other coping mechanism. I think it's true. It's the feeling that they're looking for, which is feeling, whatever it is, heard, seen, important, getting the attention, the validation, obviously won't be done in that way. It kind of brings you the opposite, right? When you're actually going through it.
Yeah. So. Is this something that you see a lot in your practice as well? People who come to you and they're suffering, they know that they're not happy, but they're resistant to something that might actually make their life completely different in the best way possible.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's fear, there's insecurity, there's so many blockages that get in the way, limiting beliefs, thinking that they're not good enough or they don't deserve to feel better. So there's a lot that comes into play there, but absolutely. I think that that's a huge theme that I see, is people knowing that they need to show up to therapy because they know in some sense that they're not happy, but they don't know what to do to change it, or they don't know if they're willing to change it. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think that a lot of people fall into the victim mentality of life is just always happening to me and things are never going to get better? And do you feel like the more you fall into the victim mentality, the more your life just kind of disintegrates because you don't actually you don't believe that you have the power to make things better?
Yes. Yeah. I think that people do victimize themselves. There's a certain type of person that I think will see themselves perpetually as the victim and disempower themselves in doing so. They kind of don't think that they are worth having a life worth living. And yeah, absolutely. I think that happens all the time. And
in the sense of, let's say, a lot of the women who listen to this podcast or women who probably feel that of, I don't really deserve happiness. I don't really deserve joy. I don't really deserve health, whatever it is. Like, we want these things, but on a subconscious level, we don't believe that we deserve them. Where do you think that comes from?
I think that it comes from a lack of self-worth, honestly. I think that from a young age, I think everything starts from, childhood. So I always go back when it comes to, my work in therapy is go back to early childhood. Maybe it was something in the parenting or the familial system where you were made to feel like you didn't deserve to be there unless you were a helper or you did something, to stand out or achieve something. Like, you weren't just enough as you were. And then we carry that through our lives. If you don't actually do the work, then whatever that childhood wound is will remain throughout.
Yeah. And how do you change that? Like, if that started earlier on, how do you change that?
You do the work. You have to go to therapy. You have to, obviously I'm biased with this, go to therapy, but also you can read multitudes of books on it. You can, do the research, but it's really being introspective and sitting with yourself and becoming aware. Awareness is the first thing, is what is the root of the issue, because you can't, I don't know, there's a fly around here. I'm sorry. You cannot change the problem unless you know what the problem is.
Yes.
So that's really step one, ultimately.
I 100% agree with this. I always tell my clients, like, the first step to change is awareness. Because a lot of the times when it comes to dieting, what we do is we just close our eyes and we throw a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, whether that's through low carb or keto or whatever it is. Because as much as dieting is not fun and it's miserable and it costs you a lot, both emotionally, physically, it's easy in the sense that it doesn't make you do the really uncomfortable work to uncover, okay, well, what started this in the first place? Why do I keep falling into these patterns? What am I thinking about myself? What am I thinking about my life, about food, about my body that is affecting my eating habits in this way?
Right. People don't ask the question why. They just want a quick fix. They want to feel differently than they feel. So, whether it's drug addiction, alcohol, like anything, it's just another maladaptive coping mechanism, and people turn to food for that. But, what weight do you really want to lose? Is it the weight on your body, or is it the weight of other people's opinions, or is it the weight of the world? Like, what is the burden you're feeling? I mean, it's not ever just about the food.
Yeah, 100%. Right? And the greatest outcome that I love hearing from people after the program is, I'm finally living a life where I realize what's important. We never actually stop and ask ourselves, like, what am I living for? Who am I living for? I say this thing where it's like, we're always shoulding ourselves. We're always, I should be doing this. And like, who's putting these
who's
rules?
To say what you should be doing with your life?
I know.
Right. And that's the whole diet culture. It's, a one size fits all, like, do this keto, do this or that. How the hell is anyone else supposed to know what you should be doing? That's why they call it intuitive eating. I mean, as the, kind of antithesis of that. Yeah,
exactly. And when we are shitting ourselves, a lot of the times what we do is we do things that don't feel good because we think that we should be doing it. And I know I used to do this all the time. I used to over exercise. I used to exercise 7 days a week because I felt like I should. That's what I had to do. And I was definitely, when I was young, I was definitely living in unconsciousness. And I never paused myself and asked, like, okay, all these things that I'm doing, does it feel good?
Right.
does it make me happy? I know when I was really deep in my disordered eating in university, there was a year where I lost friends. I stopped going out because I was afraid to eat, and I was constantly exhausted because I wasn't eating enough.
Hmm.
And I subconsciously I thought, well, there's going to be a certain point where I'm going to get to a body size, and then people are going to love me. And as I was losing weight, I was losing friends. And like, I never made the connection of, oh,
Right.
what's going on here? Like, it's just,
Yeah.
I wish that I knew what it was that was like that wake up call of trying to piece it all together. But I honestly don't believe that there's like this light switch that goes off. I think that
Right.
it's a very progressive journey.
I agree. I mean, I used to think when I was in the eating disorder, like there's going to be this euphoric moment where, all of a sudden I run downstairs and grab a donut and it's like different. And it's so not that way. But what it really is like a series of choosing recovery again and again and again at each
Yes.
meal, with each bite. You really have to kind of go through. And then over time, yeah, it gets easier, but it's a lot of work and you have to be committed to it. But yes, it does not just happen like a light switch on and off.
It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of uncomfortable work too.
Oh yeah. It's not pleasant. I mean, for sure. No.
No. And a lot of my clients say like, sometimes I'm going to make them do reflective exercises and they're like, my brain hurts after. Like, yeah, it's because you're forcing your brain to think a different way. Like you're actually using.
You're rewiring.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I'm sure that you're probably a big fan and a big proponent of neuroplasticity. So how would you describe neuroplasticity to someone who doesn't know the term, doesn't know what it is?
I mean, I kind of just think of it as changing the way that you think and expanding your mind around, as you learn and grow, and just facilitating, integrating that new knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how I think of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that a lot of people get fixed in that the belief that the way that they think is going to be the only way that they're ever going to be able to think.
Sure. Right.
And I think it's not true. And there's science behind it that shows that like I find that I've gotten better at understanding that I think a certain way, but I'm able to see how some people, their reality and their truth, they truly believe and think that way. And they don't know that there's another way to think. And then they don't know there's another way to live.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's why I study personality types. I'm really into the Enneagram.
Okay.
For that reason also, because I'm fascinated by the different ways in which people think and operate. So, in the same vein, it's people don't realize that like their starting point is very different and their lens through which they look at life is just so different from other people's. And it's an important awareness to have because then we try to, change other people and think that we're just how we are and that's how everybody else is, but that's not the case.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I know when I was starting my business, I did a lot of personality tests because that was the biggest thing is I needed to know myself and I needed to know how I best function in order to play into my strength and to know my weaknesses. Would you say, I didn't think that we would go into personality tests, but I think it's so important. Would you say that this is something that people can utilize if they're trying to make a change? Let's say, they feel like someone's listening to this and they're like, oh my God, I have been sleepwalking through life and I don't feel like I know myself. Do you think that that's a good place to start? And if not, like what is a good place to start?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great entry point, I think, is figuring out, because I think people that are sleepwalking, they don't know how to locate themselves, right? And they don't have their own personal experience. They don't know what that lens through which they look at life looks like. So personality typing systems are great. I mean, the Enneagram is really the only one that I actually use, but I know there's obviously others. But yeah, that's a great starting point. I think anything where you're learning about the self and just kind of tuning out to tune in and figuring out like what your preferences are, what your opinions are apart from other people's, which I also talk about a lot, is like forming your own opinions and not just following the crowd and all that.
Yeah, I feel like that's easier said than done. Like if someone, do you feel like you have any actionable tips or advice for someone who, and I had to do a full social media detox, to really make sure that when I was going on social media, I didn't feel worse about myself. I found that this was something that was really helpful for me. But if someone feels like they're constantly living under the pressure of other people's opinions and going with what other people are doing, what can they do in order to start forming their own opinions and living life on their terms?
So first, recognize it. Let's say you've done that. Then I think in the moment, it's like, okay, why are you saying no? Or why are you saying yes when you want to say no? Right? Like really getting specific in those moments of, okay, I noticed that whatever I'm saying isn't congruent with how I'm feeling. And once you know that, then it becomes a question of why. And so then you start to explore, why do I think I said that? Did I feel uncomfortable in that moment? Did I feel pressured? Like what were the themes and things coming up? And then over time, continuing to like notice those patterns, which is like, you can do this work in therapy, which is great. If not, you can also do it on your own, just journaling, just getting specific with yourself on like, I noticed that I keep, for example, like saying yes, because I don't want to create separation in my environment. I want to be in harmony with my environment, which I think is a big fear for a lot of people, is if they say another thing, they're going to stand alone and then they're going to have no friends and no acquaintances.
Yeah. I feel like that's for the chronic people pleaser,
Yes.
what if I say no and people stop liking me and that always just comes down to a lack of self-worth and self-esteem, just thinking I'm not enough the way that I am. So I need to constantly be catering to other people's needs in order to be liked and to be loved and to not be abandoned.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And probably that happened early in childhood where they had a separation because people had different opinions and they don't want to recreate that. So they kind of just fade into the background of their lives, which is, it's a really sad thing if you think of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you can use that sadness to your advantage if you're somebody that's like that, kind of turning that into, what can I do with this then?
And I feel like it all wraps into disordered eating, because I think one thing that I don't know if you see this, but I see this often is women are very worried or reluctant, I would say, to invest in themselves, to invest the money, to invest the time, to invest the energy to heal themselves, because they don't think they're as important as their kids' needs, and they don't think they're as important as their husband's needs and their family's needs. And so they're always, in a way, people pleasing. They're always pleasing other people's needs and putting their own needs on the back burner. But all that does is it leaves less of you to actually be there for people around you.
That's exactly what I was thinking. It's like, if you do want to be there for other people, you can't do that without being there for yourself first. So in essence, you are helping your kids, you are helping your friends and family, because you're helping yourself first.
Yeah. Now that I'm talking about it, I feel like it really just all comes down to self-worth, self-love, because if you don't have self-worth or self-love, well, you don't think your life should be better and you don't think your needs are important. And then it all bleeds into different areas of your life.
Right. That's why the inner work is essential before anything else, because if you don't do it, then yes, you can fall into an eating disorder. You can fall into, whatever the trap is, because you don't know what your needs are. You don't know how to meet those needs.
Yeah.
So.
I saw something that you had put on your social media, which was you can learn how to read a book, and you'll be able to read that one book, but if you learn how to know yourself and you know how to be your own expert, then you are setting yourself up for so much growth, and you're setting yourself up to honestly become smarter and to be better for the rest of your life.
Exactly. I mean, it's the foundation, right? It's the work that people skip mostly because they think they have to become an expert in something else.
Mm-hmm.
But what about becoming an expert in yourself? And then, you have a clear mind and you're aligned and you can actually go after whatever you want. And you're not, I think a lot of people don't realize why they struggle to make decisions, or why, they're afraid to take risks. That it all stems back from this lack of sense of self and understanding that work and the importance. So Yeah.
It's so true what you were saying. Like people will try to learn different things and our brain can only learn so much. Like we only have so much capacity of making new decisions and of learning. And I think it's a shame because people will spend so much time and energy researching diet books and weight loss techniques, and they become an expert on nutrition and food. They could literally write their own book on that, and none of that serves them because that's not what they need to know. They don't need more nutrition advice. They don't need to know the calories in every single food because they need
to know less of that. Right. They're stuffing their brains with these data points that really, where is that going to get you at the end of the day?
Yeah, exactly. And like your brain power, if you were to direct it to things that are so much more important, like knowing yourself, you're going to be moving at an exponential speed than you are now.
Absolutely. You can do anything. Once you know yourself, that's the main thing.
Yeah. So as we're wrapping this up, if you could share, so I'm a really big fan of meditating and journaling, and I love asking questions and asking myself questions. What are 3 questions that someone, if they're walking away from this podcast and they're like, okay, I want to get to know myself or know my goals or know my vision, they take out their piece of paper. What are 3 questions they can journal on?
Ooh, okay. What thoughts am I scaring myself with?
What thoughts am I scaring myself with? So are these thoughts related to their eating disorder, disordered eating, to their life, like to themselves?
I would say it could be towards whatever, but I mean more like with yourself, like limiting beliefs. Like if I put myself out there, then I'm going to lose friends. If I stand on my own, right. So what
are your biggest fears right now?
Sure. Yes.
Okay.
Totally.
Okay.
What are your biggest fears? What do you want to say that you haven't allowed yourself to say?
Okay. I love that. I don't think I've ever journaled on that question, so I'm going to write that down.
Me either. I just thought of it, but I'm going to journal.
Yeah. So what do you want to say
that you haven't allowed yourself to say?
Okay.
And what would your life look like if you believed you were enough?
I love that question. I love that question. I always ask myself, like, what would your life look like if you knew that you couldn't fail? If you knew that no matter what you tried, maybe it would take a week, maybe it would take a month, maybe it would take 10 years, but no matter what, you knew that your success was inevitable. What actions would you take on the daily basis? And what would your life look like?
Yep. It's a beautiful question. And, you know, it's inspiring. So I think those are great.
That's a great question because I know it's just the fear of failure, the fear of feeling those negative emotions that come with trying something, putting energy into it, and then failing, quote unquote, that stop people.
Let yourself think that. I think that people are afraid to imagine what that life will look like because they don't think that they could ever get that. So dare to dream that way.
Fear of disappointment too. Like, what if I set my expectations high and then
what if it doesn't happen? Okay, well, what if you never try and then you regret it for your whole life?
That's exactly it. Yeah. I always talk to my friends when they're like kind of downplaying themselves. And I'm like, why are you setting your expectations low? Because no matter what, if you get the job, you don't get the job, it works out with the guy, it doesn't work out, you're gonna be disappointed. You're not fooling anyone here. You're gonna be unhappy in a different way, maybe, but you're gonna be unhappy.
But at least you will be self-assured that you went for it.
You went all in.
Yep. That's the main thing. So
yeah. I love that. Thank you so much, Emma. I could talk to you for hours, but it was so lovely to have you on today.
Thank you so much. You'll have to come on my podcast after this.
Yeah, I would love to. So where can people find you? I know that we talked about Instagram, so tell us everywhere that they can find you if they want to contact you.
So That Trendy Therapist on Instagram, That Trendy Therapist Podcast on Spotify. My book, The Truth Teller, I will be promoting it. So it's coming out early next year. Those are the main places.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to put that all in the show notes, but thank you so much for joining us, Emma. And thank you all for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magnan Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magnan Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.